The strike that shouldn't have been possible. The explosion could be seen for 15 kilometers, not just smoke, black columns of it hundreds of feet high, twisting into the sky like a signal flare from hell. The fireball? It lit up the morning like a second sunrise. The train carried 660,000 liters of diesel and aviation fuel, enough to power a military offensive, enough to keep armored columns rolling for days. And in less than 4 minutes, it was all gone. But here's the question nobody could answer. How? How did Ukrainian forces reach a train protected by Russian jammers, anti-air defenses, and 35 kilometers of hostile territory? Military doctrine said it was impossible.
The telemetry
Maps said it was out of reach.
Check the heat
Even the
signature
drones
again.
themselves, built from hobbyist parts, weren't supposed to fly that far. But they did. Because this wasn't a lucky strike. It was the result of months of planning, dozens of people, and a strategy so precise, it turned a garage-built drone
The
into
train
a
will be
cruise
here at
missile.
0400. We need
You
to secure
see,
the perimeter.
in traditional
What about this entry
warfare,
point?
range equals safety. The further behind the lines, the safer you are. But that idea just died in a fireball that took 6 hours to burn out. And the world took notice. This wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a psychological breach, a signal to every Russian logistics officer that behind the lines no longer exists. Nowhere is safe. And behind that explosion was a team of people you've never heard of, working in silence under pressure with one shot to change the game. So who are they? Let's meet the people behind the signal. Meet the men behind the signal. They don't wear uniforms with medals. They don't march in parades. And if you passed them on the street, you'd never guess they were at war. But they are.
Remember why you are
They're
here.
coders, gamers, mechanics, fathers. Some barely out of their 20s. Others old enough to remember a different kind of war.
Something has changed.
But all of them share one thing.
What do
They
you see
fly
there?
blind into chaos and make it look like choreography. This is the Ronin unit, a small elite group within Ukraine's drone force, trained not just to operate drones, but to feel them, to navigate by instinct when the screens go black, to keep calm when a missile takes out the repeater and their $3,000 quadcopter becomes a 120 pounds mid-pH paperweight. Every operator logs over 200 hours in simulators before ever flying real missions. Not just normal flying, but failure flying. Video feed gone? Count 10 seconds. Visualize the path. Adjust left for the rail curve. GPS spoofed? Use the sun's angle. Count the river crossing. Pull up for the power line. They don't just memorize routes. They memorize feelings. The slight pull of a headwind
Multiple
at
contacts
kilometer
incoming.
12. The moment when signal noise starts to buzz louder than the drone's own whine. There's a saying in Ronin, if you can't see the train, fly like you already have.
Please.
One
Just
operator,
hold on.
call sign Raven, told his family he was just doing tech work. In reality, he flew the second drone that struck the fuel convoy. He'd practiced the route for days in a homemade sim rig in his basement. His kids thought he was playing a flight game. He wasn't. The moment the repeater drone was shot down, Raven's screen went dark. Static. Hissing. Nothing. But he didn't panic. He whispered his mantra. Count to 15, slight right, follow the tracks.
All right, that's a clear window.
5 seconds.
We did it.
Still blind. 10 seconds. The grainy image returned, just in time to see the treetops flying by below. He was back, locked on target. 20 kilometers still to go. The hidden web, Ukraine's four-way coordination. If you thought this strike was pulled off by just a few brave pilots, you'd be missing the bigger picture. Behind every successful drone mission in Ukraine, there's a hidden web, a 4-part symphony of intelligence, interception, disruption, and precision. And when all 4 play together, even the best Russian defenses become paper shields. It starts with KBBL-9, Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Unit. They tracked that specific train for weeks. They didn't just know when it moved, they knew its speed, which cars carried fuel, which ones carried decoys, and when security was weakest. They listened, they watched, they waited. This wasn't just a drone strike. It was a chess move set up 10 turns in advance.
Copy
Then
that.
comes
We are in
Alpha
position.
Unit, Ukraine's electronic ears. Their job? Intercept Russian radio chatter. If any word of unidentified aircraft popped up, even in a whispered command, Alpha would know, and the strike would abort. Because in this kind of mission, stealth is survival. Next, the State Special Communications Service. They don't fly drones, they fight noise. Russian jammers are brutal, bubbles of electromagnetic chaos that fry signals on contact. Next role, to punch holes in those bubbles at the perfect time. They use directional EW bursts, 30-second blasts that slice through jamming long enough for the drones to see again. But there's a cost. When they flip the switch, their position lights up on every Russian system. They get 30 seconds of clarity and 17 seconds to run before artillery lands. Precision, pressure, zero room for mistakes. And finally, Ronin. The hands on the sticks, the pilots who fly headfirst into darkness relying on all the other teams to do their jobs perfectly. It's a delicate chain. If any one group falters, the whole mission collapses. But that's what makes this strike extraordinary. Every link held, 4 separate teams, 4 distinct missions, 1 unified goal, prove that Russia's rear lines are no longer untouchable. And yet, coordination is only part of the equation. The enemy wasn't sleeping. They had their own electronic fortress waiting. And what came next was a battle not of bombs and bullets, but of frequencies and static. Let's step into that invisible war zone. Dancing through the static, fighting the jammer wall. 35 kilometers deep behind enemy lines, the air is quiet. But the electromagnetic spectrum, it's on fire. Russian forces don't rely on fences or guards to protect their rail lines anymore. They use something far more invisible and dangerous. The R-330 Zedge GTEL system, a massive truck-mounted electronic warfare platform. It floods everything between 100 and 2,000 minarets with raw interference, creating a 15-kilometer bubble where nothing gets through, or so the manuals say. At 25 kilometers out, the lead drone crossed the invisible border, and the screen went to snow. Not a little static. Total blackout. This is where most missions end. But Ukraine had a plan. Frequency hopping. 40 channels per second. Each hop looking for just a sliver of clean air. Milliseconds of opportunity. Enough for a single flicker of video, a shadow, a shape, a heading. It's not flying. It's decoding chaos. The R-330 Zedge can't cover every frequency at full power. That's its flaw. Ukraine's drone operators studied dozens of prior jamming patterns. They knew where the weak spots were, frequencies Russian systems rarely bothered to block. So they built a dance. 3 quick hops on commonly jammed bands to confuse Russian techs, then a sharp jump to a gap frequency, one they bet would be clean. Hold for 2 seconds, back to the decoys, like listening for a whisper during a hurricane. But it wasn't enough. The blackout stretched to 15 seconds. Now imagine, you're flying at 80 kilometers per hour toward a moving train. You can't see, can't hear. GPS is being spoofed. Even your magnetic compass is lying. This is where most machines crash. But Ronin pilots, they lean into the silence. They fly by rhythm, by terrain memory, by mantra. Count to 15, slight right. Follow the tracks. Count to 10. Climb 3 meters for the power lines. Watch the sun's angle. Don't drift left.
Originated from coordinates
These aren't just
X-ray 7
phrases.
Tango.
They're life support.
Confirming the
Mental
trajectory
algorithms
aligns with
for
our
flying
intelligence.
blind.
We're looking
And
at
just
a
when it
significant
looked like
gap
the
here.
drone might drift too far, a burst of clarity cracked
We need to
through the static.
reevaluate the signal.
The video feed returned. Fuzzy, grainy, but enough. A sliver of railroad track shimmering in a sea of noise. It was back on course. And behind it, 3 more drones, each 30 seconds apart, each watching the leader's path, copying its frequency hops. It was working, but even the best dances don't last forever, because just up ahead lay the next wall, stronger, smarter, and far more brutal. Let's meet Russia's digital gatekeeper, the Kasuka-4. The $200 decoys that outwitted a $1 million radar. 10 kilometers from impact, Russian defenses came alive. The Kasuka-4 electronic warfare vehicle had done its job. It spotted the incoming drone control signals, 150 kilometers out. Now it handed off the kill order to one of Russia's most feared defense systems, the Pantsir S-1. Equipped with radar, autocannons, and 12 surface-to-air missiles, the Pantsir was built to end drone attacks before they ever got close. It locked onto the lead drone, intercept solution calculated, 8 seconds to missile launch. But then, something unexpected happened. 6 new contacts appeared on radar, flying in perfect formation. The Pantsir's targeting computer blinked, which were real, which were fakes. Because these 6 drones, all of them, were decoys, built for $200 each, some with parts from racing drones, others soldered together in a garage using, yes, aluminum from energy drink cans. And yet, to a $1 million radar system, they looked exactly like the real thing. Here's how they pulled it off. Each decoy drone carried a corner reflector, a small metal device that bounces radar waves back to their source. To Russian radar, that made them look bigger than they were, like a full-sized UAV. The goal wasn't to fool human eyes, it was to overwhelm algorithms, and it worked. The Russian operator had 2 options. 1, fire at all 6 targets and risk wasting missiles. 2, try to guess which were real and risk letting them through. He chose to fire. Missiles launched, 8 of them, but only 4 of the 6 decoys activated properly. That meant 2 real attack drones were now exposed and flying blind through a battlefield lit with explosions. It should have ended there, but it didn't, because even 4 working decoys was enough. Enough to chew up most of the Pantsir's missile supply, enough to drain its attention, enough to clear a path. And here's the twist. This wasn't even the first time. Ukrainian drone teams have sent 20 decoys at once in other strikes, just to empty Russian launchers. It's a war of attrition, fought with spare parts. The math is brutal. A Pantsir missile costs up to $300,000. A decoy drone, just $200. That's 2,500 to 1. Ukraine doesn't win this war by matching firepower. They win it by making every shot from the enemy feel like a waste. But even when the missiles were gone, the threat wasn't over. Because the Pantsir still had its twin 30mm autocannons, and the only way to survive those was to get underneath them, literally. Let's talk about the most dangerous part of this entire mission, flying at grass level. Low and slow, the 10-meter miracle. With the Pantsir nearly out of missiles, the real drones had one final enemy to beat: gravity. The Pantsir's twin 30mm autocannons are fast, ruthless, but they have a flaw. They can't shoot down. Spike. More specifically, they can't effectively track anything below 15 meters altitude. So the Ronin pilots did the unthinkable. They dropped to 10 meters, roughly the height of a 1-story house, barely high enough to clear a chain-link fence. They were now flying at grass level. And here's what that actually means. At 80 kilometers per hour, you're moving fast enough to cover a football field every 4.5 seconds. Now fill that field with trees, power lines, radio towers, flocks of birds, and uneven terrain. And look at it all through a video feed that resembles a 1980s television in a thunderstorm. That's what these pilots were seeing, if they were lucky, because even analog signals degrade in jamming zones. Most of the time, they were staring at static, guessing where the trees might be. This is where Ronin's secret weapon wasn't technology. It was memory.
Thank you, over and out.
Every drone pilot trained with satellite images, memorizing the route like a race car driver memorizes a track. At kilometer 27, climb 3 meters for the power lines. At kilometer 29, bank left, tower on the right. At kilometer 30, drop low, open terrain, gain speed. They flew this route dozens of times in simulators,
over here,
with
team.
glitches, static, even full blackouts. They practiced crashing so they could learn how not to, and it worked. Through the blur, One operator spotted something he'd only ever seen in training. A pair of power lines, sagging slightly more than expected. If he had stayed level, the drone would have clipped and crashed. Instead, he pulled up just enough, skimmed the line by inches, and dropped back down before radar could see him. That's not luck, that's training. Meanwhile, Russia's Kasuka-4 continued tracking analog control signals. But it had a problem. Analog doesn't die cleanly. Unlike digital signals, which drop off instantly when jammed, analog signals fade. Even at 80% interference, pilots might still get 20% video, just enough to see the glint of a rail, a shadow, a heat plume. It's not much, but it's enough. And at this point, the drones were just 4 kilometers out. Close enough that the target, the train, could hear them coming. The engineer pulled the throttle. The train began to accelerate. Not much, but enough to turn a near-certain hit into a 70-30 gamble. And the Ukrainians knew it. Because hitting a moving fuel train isn't just hard. It's nearly impossible. Unless you knew exactly where each fuel car would be. Even through smoke, even through fire. Let's watch what happened next. 4 hits. 1 message. No place is safe. The train was now doing 45 kilometers per hour, its whistle screaming like a dying animal as the engineer tried to outrun the incoming drones. But it was too late, because 3 kilometers behind, the first Ukrainian drone was screaming toward its target, riding just 10 meters off the ground, threading between trees, wires, and firewalls.
There it is
the
again.
operator's video feed was barely holding
I see
together,
Let's log
grainy, flickering, almost useless. But he didn't need to see everything. He needed one thing: the railroad tracks. Like glowing threads in a static storm, the steel rails guided the drone like runway lights in a blackout. He counted cars. 7, 6, 5. The third car behind the locomotive, that's the one. At 500 meters out, the signal collapsed completely. There was no more video,
Here, take this.
no
It'll keep you warm.
GPS, no
Thank
compass,
you so much, ma'am.
just memory, instinct, and math. 3 seconds. 2, 1. At 10:32 a.m., the first drone hit. The warhead punched through the steel fuel tanker and ignited 60,000 liters of diesel in a single instant. The fireball roared skyward, shattering windows in nearby villages. Emergency brakes slammed the train to a halt, and 30 seconds later, the second drone arrived. The operator couldn't see through the black smoke. Thermal cameras were blinded. Only white-hot chaos. So he did what Ronin always does. He trusted the plan. He counted the seconds, followed the track, and aimed for the 4th car. Strike 2. The 3rd drone was flying through an inferno. Visibility was 0. Navigation systems? Worthless. He had one chance. They'd studied this train for weeks. They knew the 7th car was a fuel tanker too. He dove blind. At the last second, through a break in the smoke, the tanker appeared. Just 50 meters away.
Perimeter needs to
Impact. Strike 3.
But where is the weakness?
Now only one fuel car remained, at the very end of the train, and leaving it intact wasn't an option. Every drop of diesel left behind could refuel another assault. The 4th drone, flying last, had the hardest job. The train was engulfed in fire. The smoke rose over 300 feet. Wind was shifting. Visibility, 0. He pushed forward anyway, counted down from his last visual reference. 3, 2, 1. At 10:34 a.m. and 30 seconds, the final drone hit home. All 11 tankers were now burning. 660,000 liters of fuel gone. The rails beneath were glowing red hot. Concrete ties cracked from the heat. The entire supply line unusable for at least 72 hours. But this wasn't just about logistics. This was psychological warfare. Because if Ukraine could do this, with $12,000 of drones and garage-built decoys, no train, no depot, no bridge behind Russian lines was safe anymore. The illusion of safety was gone. And in modern warfare, illusions are everything. So the mission was over. But what came next was even bigger.
We need to make sure the LZ is secure.
Let's talk about what this means for the future of war. The era of rear strike warfare has begun. For over a century, war had a simple rule. If you were far enough behind the front lines, you were safe. Supply trains, ammo depots, fuel stations. They were shielded by distance, geography, and time.
Now, this is where we're
Not
going to make
anymore.
that adjustment.
In the span of 4 minutes,
See how
a
that
team of
changes
underpaid
everything?
technicians,
We
drone
need to
pilots,
document
and
everything.
electronic
Right,
warfare
logging this section
specialists
now.
destroyed $3 million in fuel and infrastructure using drones that cost less than a used pickup truck. But the real damage? It wasn't what exploded. It was what unraveled. Russian commanders had to watch, helpless, as their rear-line supply collapsed in real time.
We are getting reports of an
They
explosion.
had to tell their troops.
So if
We don't know where
adjust
they
the
came
angle
from.
here,
They had to order investigations
That
into
might give
how
us the edge.
hobby-grade
Let's try it.
quadcopters penetrated airspace, supposedly protected by multi-layered defense systems. And now, they're doing math. If Ukraine can hit 35 kilometers today, what stops them from hitting 50 next week, 100 next month? What if every train, every bridge, every command post is suddenly in reach? This wasn't just a strike. It was a doctrine shift. A message that echoes far beyond this one battlefield. Because when garage-built technology, crowd-sourced intelligence, and human resilience combine, even the world's most advanced militaries can be made vulnerable. And here's the most sobering part. Ukraine has thousands more drones ready. More pilots, more decoys, more routes memorized down to the meter. What happened to this train wasn't an exception. It was a template. A new era has begun, where front lines are blurred and nowhere is safe. And in this new era, speed, adaptability, and belief in the mission will beat size and budget every time. The age of rear strike warfare is here, and it doesn't knock. It dives at 80 kilometers per hour, through static, through fire, through fear, and it never misses twice.